the variety of subjects, topics, different voices, interpretations. This session is one where everyone has an opinion, and everyone has many opinions, and all of us have opinions. And it's such a subject that I would think there'd be questions in this session and after the session as well. So here it comes. It's about democracy in times of conflict. The challenges of renewal of democracy in India within a global context. And we have Radha Kumar speaking with Bhupendra Choubey. Over to you, Bhupendra.
Well, thanks very much. And I think you're absolutely spot on when you say that the subject is such in front of this absolutely magnificent audience in such a serene surrounding where you can just keep, chatting and debating till, till the wee hours of the morning. But we'll try and keep it short. Since time is of essence, I was asking Radha whether if she was open to taking audience questions, and I think that's fine by both of us. So let's give ourselves around about 40 minutes in which maybe I have a few questions on my mind in terms of what I see are the challenges before democracy through my journalistic lens. And Radha, of course, spends a lot of time doing research on the basis of data and empirical facts and evidences, which gives her certain conclusions. So this book that she's written is the basis on which the framing of today's motion has been created. And it's a rather interesting book that she's written, The Republic Relearned. So friends, if ever there was a moment in time when we had to remind ourselves both of the perils and the advantages of what we often take for granted, which is our great democracy, I think this was the time. We're here, between Punjab, Himachal. Even if you were to break it down in the context of politics and identity question between these two states, you'll find that there is such a stark difference. There's a new party in power in Punjab, there is an old party in power in the state of Himachal, but there is a new leader in the state of Himachal who's trying to completely rework and rewind the political wheel in many sense. So Radha, let me first begin by asking you that 10 years of the BJP government now, and we've just finished off with the Lok Sabha election, Haryana elections have just concluded. There is a feeling that we need to go back into our democratic history, into the constitutional framework of the independence that we got, and what the notion of democracy which was envisaged by the founding fathers of our constitution. Would that be a correct way to kick off the challenges which exist before us as we try and understand what is our great democracy all about?
Yes, I think that all of us do go back to the Constitution. That's one of the great things about a constitutional democracy, is that you have a document that tells you what were the principles and the values and the goals on which this newly independent country was founded. Having said that, I'm constantly reminded of the fact that our country was born in conflict. There were the partition wars going on. The Cold War began at that point. World War II had just ended. Our neighborhood was a very volatile and unstable neighborhood. We had border disputes with a number of neighboring countries. And therefore, some elements of the founding documents were based in the context of conflict and were meant to be amended and revised as this country stabilized. And now the sad thing for us actually is that that didn't happen. So, laws like the Preventive Detention Act, for example, Sardar Patel, when he introduced it, said that he hadn't slept for 3 nights because this country that was founded as a republican democracy should not have legislation like this. But it was necessary because it was a time of conflict. It was meant to be temporary, but it was never repealed.
But when you say India achieved democracy or India became a democracy through a conflict, Actually, aren't all democracies born out of a conflict only? So what's the remarkable difference between, let's say, what we see in India and what we may describe to be democracies in any other part of the world?
No, I think that there's a difference between countries that gained independence from colonial or imperial rule and countries that had a process of the development of democratic institutions through, for example, the Industrial Revolution. So there you have a more organic process. Here we did not have the luxury of creation of institutions before we became independent.
When you say that our founding fathers of our constitutional framework had envisaged certain constitutional insulators, some insulating mechanisms, throw some light on that. Because I hear this term so much, whether the Congress was in power or now the BJP is in power, even in states, everybody swears by what the constitution founders had envisaged for India. What is it that they really envisaged actually? Many of us have forgotten that.
Yes, I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it? We were founded through a freedom struggle that is often described as a nationalist movement, but it was much wider than a nationalist movement. It was a Republican movement for equality, for overturning discriminations of all sorts. And there was a vision of this country that would be a republic of states that had come together in a federation. And, originally they were described as autonomous units. The original idea of the federative states of India was that they were autonomous units. That terminology disappeared very fast.
I mean, now, of course, we're in times where nationalism means Hindu nationalism.
It means something quite different. Nationalism now is widely regarded as a pejorative
So
term.
when did that happen? So is that the fundamental challenge when we say democracy in the times of conflict? Is that the fundamental challenge before us in our democracy today? That we've completely reinterpreted nationalism. Being a nationalist today is to take a position, not just in favor of your country, but also what the rulers of the country would like you to identify is working in favor of the country, is working in favor of the political processes. So have we changed what you describe? Nationalism at that time was actually Republican movement versus nationalism in 2024?
Well, I would certainly agree with that. It is different. And nationalism, not only in this country, but in many parts of the world, has now become a way of staking either a majoritarian claim or pitting two different identities against each other. I mean, in this country, we even go far as to talk about two different ideas of India, which is, frankly, a phrase that I find anathema. But to go back to the question, the people of a country have the right to reshape their country according to their ethos as it happens. The problem is that you can't have ruling parties or one dominant community reshaping the ethos of a country. A country has to represent all of its citizens if it's a democratic country. Now, in our case, we had the vision of a liberal democracy, along with the vision of an egalitarian society, along with the vision of a federation of autonomous units, along with even the idea of a civic democracy, as opposed to an electoral democracy. Electoral democracy was something that was always a baseline. But we also had the idea that our citizens would have a civic consciousness of the values of fundamental rights, of equality, of different types of liberties, of diversity and pluralism, of inclusivity. You can use many terms.
So do you find a contradiction between these two now? Between civic consciousness, civic democracy, and vote-based democracy?
It can be argued, and it should be argued, that while we had the goal of civic democracy, we never really managed to achieve it. We are not an egalitarian country. We don't have the base of egalitarianism, nor do we have collective collective spirit of, say, for example, municipal hygiene, or that we all have to share a common space together. We don't try to maximize our power over that common space. We try to see how we can all share that space better together. Those are fundamental elements of civic democracy.
But then, again, if I was to speak on behalf of the political class, the constant argument which is made is this, that what matters most is elections. A party contests an election, a party gets a certain number of votes, a party is either in power or a party is in opposition. Now, the party which is in power, if that party does not set the rules of the game, then we say, no, our civic consciousness, our civic political ecosystem is being compromised, as is the argument which is often made these days against the ruling party at the center. Is that a misnomer? Isn't there a contradiction between the two?
No, I don't think so. I mean, obviously, political parties work in electoral cycles. And this is why the adage is that if you want a particular policy adopted, you have to make it appealing enough that the politician can see the results in his favor before the next election happens. That's fine. But that does not mean that any ruling party is entitled to violate the Constitution. They are not. Those are the laws of the land. You may go by your electoral cycle, but you cannot violate the laws of the land. And I'm sorry to say, in my belief, over the past 10 years, not only the laws of the land, but the fundamental ethics on which we were founded have been wholesale violated. We have normalized what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil. How is it possible that no eyebrows are raised when people are lynched? It is, to me, this should be inconceivable. But it's not inconceivable anymore.
So let's go back.
How is it that we can praise bulldozers knocking down people's houses? It's illegal, for goodness sake.
I was reading a...
Celebrate rapists.
I was reading a tweet which has been put up by one of the prominent Hindi channels, and I don't know what the audience... I myself have done television in my entire life, but I don't sit in judgment on legacy media or new age media. The tweet's framing was such that it made me think that a bulldozer is being used to demolish someone's house, right? The religiosity of the person whose house is being demolished, that is brought out. The bulldozer is converted into a sense of triumphalism, that a great, magnificent event is happening, and it is being equated to someone's house being demolished. If we were really evolved, as you say, as a civic polity, how should we as a society really be responding to this kind of an equivalence?
I would say, first of all, every court should have taken suo motu cognizance right at the outset, because, as I say, it's illegal. Unfortunately...
To be honest, there have been constitutions, there have been court pronouncements on this.
There have, rather late and rather weak, and the high courts say one thing and the Supreme Court says another thing. So you have all sorts of problems. The police should have been able to be independent enough to refuse to accompany demolition squads. They should have stopped them. But the police are entirely politically dominated. And this is an issue that actually the founding fathers, Sardar Patel and Jawaharlal Nehru, were constantly writing letters to chief ministers saying, please respect the independence of the administrative service. Please respect that the police service have to be able to function according to the law of the land. Please do not try to get your people released and other people imprisoned and your opponents imprisoned. And despite all of those pleas over that 17-year period, what we saw after that was more and more political control over appointments, over transfers, over promotions, and one may say discouraging the police from performing their duties. And look at what we saw, what we have seen happening over the past 5 years. We see the police of one state being pitted against the police of another state. In the case of that film actor, who died.
Sushant's,
You
Rajput,
see
yes.
the Bihar police being pitted against the Maharashtra police. And a sort of public and open attempt to devalue the integrity of the police even beyond its devaluation already. You see Haryana police fighting with Punjab police over the farmers' agitation. You see shootouts between police in Assam and Meghalaya. This is, any responsible government should be stepping in to stop, to stop that, not encourage it. This is the best way to
But
break
why do
up
you
the
say, but
country.
aren't you being a little uncharitable here? At the end of the day, the anti-Sikh riots happened when the Congress was in power. The most recent Muzaffarnagar riots in Uttar Pradesh happened when the Samajwadi Party was in power. Okay, let me ask you, a blunt question before this audience, and I'm sure there will be follow-up questions when we throw the house open. Is there a problem of looking at the last 10 years of democracy in this government, of this country? Because maybe many people do not appreciate a political party or do not appreciate a political leader. Therefore, in the desire of completely disagreeing and dismissing that party and the leader, we are completely dismissing the entire democratic process. Is that a problem?
Well, it depends on how you want to assess the democratic process today. We see that the Election Commission, let's say baseline of democracy is electoral, free and fair elections. It's not at all clear that we have free and fair elections anymore. We see an election commission that will sanction opposition political leaders.
You just had an election in 2024 where 240 seats went to a party which had 303 seats.
Yes, but you can't judge in terms of the result. You have to look at the process itself. And what you do see over and over and over again is, let's take any leader you want. Let's take Kharge. Kharge is told that you cannot campaign for 24 hours for making some criticism of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is not told he cannot campaign for 24 hours when he talks about Muslims being enemies or infiltrators or this or that. Now, this is not, look at the balance. Where have you balanced? You can't do that. You certainly cannot start putting chief ministers in jail before or during or immediately after an election without having strong evidence. You had in the previous session a great discussion on the trouble of policing and evidence and prosecutions. You have judgments that say you have to have fast-track courts for politicians. But where are those fast-track courts? The cases are still pending. You have increasing criminalization in Parliament that the Association for Democratic Reforms is extremely well documented. And you also find, by the way, that it's the ruling party has the highest number of criminals. Probably, if an opposition party becomes a ruling party, they may too have the highest number of criminals. There is a systemic flaw which goes beyond, perhaps, the BJP or the present ruling establishment. But I will say that all the evidence shows that the ruling establishment has done a great deal, not only to make those flaws greater, but to add new and new and new flaws.
Well, let me just add to this. I come from UP. You have had an association with UP, and now you live in the lovely place, Kodaikanal. You go to UP, you go to Bihar, you go to Maharashtra, you go to Haryana. Police postings, first and foremost, are done on the basis of, let's say, loyalty to the regime. Then caste becomes a very important part, certainly in the Hindi heartland. So if we have to, now that we've identified all these dangers, all these challenges before democracy, let me ask you, if you were to look for solutions, right, what are those things that come to your mind which will strengthen the democratic forces, which in your view are being challenged today?
Oh, so many things that could be done. For a start, we've had a great erosion even of the limited rights that states had. fiscally, for example, the share of taxes that states get is getting smaller and smaller because more and more taxes are being placed as cesses, which are central. So where you get your taxes is now a much more restricted field, and then comes the delivery. Then comes, oh, well, this state, which happens to be an opposition state, has not performed well, and so we won't release their share of taxes to them. Now, this is, either you prove that, prove to me that this opposition-ruled state is doing worse on performing its duties than the ruling party ruled states. That's absolutely no evidence whatsoever. In fact, if there is evidence, the evidence is that some of the largest, our UP, is not doing well. It may be growing faster than some others, but that's because the baseline is so much lower than with others. And so the gap is still huge over there. Now you have, you mentioned the riots. The 84 riots,
2013.
I read every
riots.
single riot inquiry commission report. Every single one of them stressed one point above all, that politicians must not visit the police stations. They must keep away when riot investigations are going on. They must not interfere. Every single one of them. Of course, in the last 10 years, we have not had a single riot investigation commission set up, which in itself is a terrible blot. These commissions are essential if we want to strengthen our democracy. Look at our investigative oversight commissions. The Women's Commission, the RTI Commission, the Minorities Commission, the Backward Classes Commission. We've got a dozen statutory commissions as well as autonomous oversight commissions. Most of them lack even the full complement of commissioners today. The Minorities Commission, I think, has one commissioner. They do no work. They have not published a single report since 2017. Some reports go to parliamentary committees, but parliamentary committee reports are not made very public. So you don't know what is happening at all. So that one very important element of any democracy, you have the executive, you have the judiciary, and then you have check and balance institutions such as the media, such as parliament. None of those are, and these independent oversight commissions, none of those are functioning today. So that, I would say, is easy. First thing you can do is restore the dignity and the autonomy of oversight commissions, encourage real debate in parliament. It is an absolute horror that a legislation as important as the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act was passed in 20 minutes without any discussion or debate. And when opposition parties ask for time, they're not given the time. I read all the parliamentary debates, and I must say I absolutely love doing it. But if you looked at the amount of time that was spent on discussing legislation in the early years, compared to today, it's something like 50:1, not even 10:1, not even 2:1. You had every single important legislation was discussed at great length.
But I'll give you the answer, from a media landscape. A very senior politician in the first episode of between 2014 and 2019 once told me that when great discussions take place in Parliament, they don't make it as front page headlines in the media. But there is a walkout in Parliament, somebody said something or the other, some banal statement being made, there's immediate primetime debate, it's immediate front page headlines. So my question to you is this, that in the age of hyper social media, in the age where what we're speaking may be getting converted into reels and tweets and Instagram posts and whatnot, do you think the fundamental challenge before democratic processes across the world, not just in India, is simply put the amount of intervention which these technologies are, these big tech firms, today have on democratic processes? Is there discussion taking place around that challenge in our country?
I'm not going to go to that question yet. I'm going to go to the first part of what you said, which is, sorry to say, I have great contempt for the media in India. I don't believe they do their research. Even before this administration, most of your electronic media did not have good fact checkers. You could always have people giving false information because the anchors were not properly briefed. They were not checking what people were saying. And so 50% of whatever happened in the media was just false information or propaganda. You read the news.
50%.
Easy. Read the news.
That's your understanding. That's your insight, right?
That's
not an
that's
empirically
my
understated.
Understated insight. If you want me to empirically, at one point I wanted to sit down and note every single
I'd have to see that report.
thing. But I never bothered to do it because I thought, by the time I finished writing the one,
the percentage will increase.
three more fake news propagandas have happened. My hand is not fast enough.
But Radha, my point is on big tech. Look at the US elections.
I understand
right?
your point.
Isn't that a huge challenge today before democratic processes? I mean, if Elon Musk tomorrow, just imagine, if Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter, the owner of X, tomorrow ends up becoming the #2 of US administration and this big superpower. I mean, can you imagine the amount of power which should have been given to someone who's at the end of the day a private billionaire?
Yes, but you see, in the US, you still have a print media and indeed some electronic media, which is independent, which does do its homework, which does fact check, and which puts out all that information. So you have an alternative source always. Big tech has not yet, maybe in time to come, certainly if Trump is elected, they may well take over all independent sources of information, but that hasn't happened yet. We do know that Mr. Putin has time and again tried to influence the US elections. This may be one of the problems of wanting to be and being a superpower. We are not. We certainly saw in the 2014 election in India for the very first time the use of social media and of, holograms and so on to create the impression of a great public wave, which, sad to say, seemed to us to be true enough that we went along with the voting. We voted according to what we were being told. Whether that was true or not, I don't know, because I haven't done that particular research. But I was appalled by the use of holograms. And I continue to be appalled by the fact that less and less of our parliamentarians go to their constituencies, consult their voters on what would they like to see on A, B, or C legislation.
Well, let me just tell you this.
This should be public domain discussion and debate.
Let me inform the audiences here before I come to my last question and throw the floor open. Do you know every politician in this country, whether an MLA or an MP today, he doesn't need to go to the constituency. Who needs to go to the constituency are political consultants. So every politician has his own team, his or her own team of data crunchers, and there are these dashboards and war rooms. Prashant Kishore famously brought in all this great data crunching into Indian electoral landscape. The Congress has its own in-house mechanism. Regional parties have their own in-house mechanisms, to the extent that a deputy chief minister of a very powerful state told me, "Bhaiya, मैं आपके साथ यहाँ बैठा हूँ और मेरे एक क्षेत्र में campaigning चल रही है, मुझे नहीं पता." Right? Someone else is doing it on his behalf. So the entire process of reaching out, in a sense, has also been outsourced. But my final question to you in terms of challenges.
Well, I'm going to contest that as well.
Yes.
Because that's not reaching out. These consultants basically go to estimate how many votes will I get, how many votes will he get. They are not saying, tell me, do you approve of the new artificial intelligence legislation? They are not going out and asking.
No, you're talking of an exit poll. I'm not talking of an exit poll or opinion poll. I'm trying to tell you that today there are mechanisms which have been worked out by various political parties where through the year this process actually happens. But it's happening through political consultants, where they may go, they may say that, are you in approval of of what we're thinking, of whatever the policy change that a particular legislator may be thinking? What is it that is being done by a particular political party? I mean, those processes are there. But my point to you, Radha, is this. There is so much of talk, another important aspect of our democracy, and I wonder whether it's a challenge or an opportunity, is this business of one nation, one poll. Do you think we as a country, as a polity, have we reached that stage that let there be one election for state assemblies and Lok Sabha at one given point of time of the year?
No, I mean, there are several issues involved, right? First and foremost is the organization of an election. I mean, we're in a position where we organize a state election in 3 phases, 6 phases. How many phases do you think a national election would take? If one state takes 6 phases, our 38 states or whatever it is will take a year? I mean, do 1 year of it, just one endless continuous election? So there's just an infrastructural capacity problem first. Then comes the other question that state legislatures sometimes do fall before they complete their term. They will have to have an election within 3 months. You can't say now you wait, there'll be president's rule and you wait until our next one election. So you have that problem as well. Furthermore, it's a sad aspect of our democracy, but it does seem that the election time is a time when there is some scope for the voter to say, this is the issue of my concern. I want you to do A or B or C. He or she doesn't get that opportunity the rest of the time. So if that is the case, then having separate staggered elections is much better, because you are giving the voter a much greater opportunity to speak about his or her interests at the local level. So your panchayati institution elections should be separate. Your legislative assembly elections should be separate, and your general elections should be separate. And we know very well that the Indian voter knows exactly what the difference, issue-wise and interest-wise, between these 3 sets of elections are. So he and she wants to use that opportunity. Either I want to talk about my streets or water, or I want to talk about why is my assembly not looking after this community or that community? Or at the general election level, I want to say, why is my state not getting the same as his state? So these are very different sets of issues that I want to raise. So I would say, in terms of democracy itself, the more opportunities you give to the voter to express preference, issues, interests, the better it is for your democracy. The second point, that one nation point, this country was founded as a union of many nations. What does the linguistic identification of states mean? The whole understanding was language, culture, trading practices, social practices, not only differ community to community, they also differ region to region. And that was the idea of states having a linguistic identity which encompassed the other cultural and economic aspects of that state. Now you say one nation. How are you going to make this happen? You can try brute force. We've seen it over the past 10 years. You howl people down, you twist laws, you insert, if you can't make it happen through overt democratic means such as parliament, you do it in sneaky means. Suddenly you will get in every state administrative orders that will be in Hindi, translated into English, but not necessarily translated into the state language. Now this is, it is simply the amount of absurd sneakiness that is going on with our ruling party is is appalling. And finally, on this one nation idea, part of it also ties in to the European ethnic nationalism on which 19th century Europe formed many of its states. We didn't have that, and we don't need it. It's ugly, it's divisive. Europe had to fight I don't know how many wars to get out of that problem, and then finally come together as a union. We haven't had to fight those wars, we're starting them now. And we have an opportunity to stop them now, and we should do so.
Okay, well, that was incredible, Radha. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your thoughts. You've treated upon several contentious subjects, and that's why when the Master ceremony was speaking about, these are all subjects in which I can keep going on and on and on. But let's throw the house open. If anybody would have any question, just introduce yourself once. Okay, ma'am, right here. Just let us know your name and shoot your question. Let me know whenever time's up. 10 minutes, I think. 5 minutes. Okay, 5 minutes. So maximum 5 questions. Okay. Mike, would you speak with Mike?
My name is Anu. Since we're talking about democracy, I just wanted to say what happened to the education system and the basic needs like water, roads, public transport system, electricity, jobs, medical facilities, and now more so good air and traffic discipline that should have reached the interiors of the country soon after independence, or at least after the first 5-year plan, so that the people could have been aware and voted sensibly.
Every election in this country since India's independence has been fought in the name of Garibi Hatao.
Removing the Garib or the
So
Garib
1951 to 2024.
And there's another question. What happened to the leaders with stature? Where are those leaders? Leaders that had stature. Where are they?
Radha, you want to take that question? I'm not answering that question.
I mean, that's a question that has run through the research that went into this book. I was horrified to find, for example, we on paper abolished caste. Then we had reservations. But to this date, 75 years of independence, we have never been able to fulfill the reserved quotas. It's an absolute, I mean, it's a scandal, right? I feel ashamed that we haven't done more. Your point about education, we spend far too little of our GDP on education. If you look at some of the Asian countries that have done extremely well economically, they put a much larger part of their GDP into education and into quality education, including technical training. Our idea that education is either high science or high humanities is, I'm sorry to say, a very elitist understanding that applies to jobs for me, not for the improvement of the infrastructure of this country.
Okay.
Anji.
Yeah.
One last question. Okay, one last question.
Yes. My name is Gursham Sheer Singh. I'm a freelance journalist. And as you have pointed out that we are born out of a conflict. And there are certain regions in this nation which are being gifted with the conflict as they entered into this nation, like Punjab, Kashmir, and the Northeast. And all these nations have witnessed state repression, armed insurgencies, human rights violations, and that they are grappling with the issues till today, like Niger and Manipur and Kashmir. So do you think that our democracy has provided enough space to those very regions to look to the world, to the nation, their idea of nation? How they, from their lens, how you see this?
Yeah, I tried to refer to that a little bit at the beginning. You know, I can understand that if you're a new country and you're trying to establish yourself, you create a very strong central administration, despite calling yourself a federation of autonomous units. However, once you have stabilized, you must go back to the original idea. You are a federation, you are a republican federation. You have to allow states to find their own solutions to conflict with the help of the center. The center cannot dictate how that conflict will be resolved because, frankly, they don't know. They don't have the bandwidth to do it.
Well, let me just wrap up this conversation because I can see so many hands here. Radha is here. I'm here. I'm happy to have a conversation, a cup of tea. Let me just say this. You know, there is a utopian idea of politics and there is a very pragmatic, realistic idea of politics. Politics in this country was fought, is fought, and will continue to be fought largely on caste lines. There is no solution to that. It's a sad reality, but you can't run away from that. I know Radha may or may not agree with me. But thank you so much for being such a lovely audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bhupen, and thank you, Radha.
Time is out, sir.
Can we take it offline, please? We may not have time. Sir, you can take it offline, please.
This is something which
we don't have time. Please take it offline. Thank you very much.
It'll take 10 seconds. The question to you, ma'am, is this. We have opted for democracy. In the last 200, 300 years, as a student, I'm figuring out that democracy doesn't seem to be able to deliver for people. What do you see happening next? Is democracy going to crash, or is it a concept that will fail? And what are we going towards?
Have we failed as a democracy? It's a straight question that you may want to ask.
Absolutely. You're so eloquent.
I think democracies always have to struggle to improve themselves. And in this book, I've actually talked about 3 waves of renewal of democracy in India, the 77 to 80, then 1989 to 1998, and then 2004 to 2014. And I have said that I believe we're on the cusp of a 4th wave. It still has to emerge. I see little shoots in many parts. My only hope is that in this 4th wave, we remedy all the flaws that we have left unattended for so long. And there are wonderful proposals from the 70s onwards on what needs to be done. I mean, the appointment of the Election Commission, having the Chief Justice there, this is a very important thing. It has been done away with by our current Parliament. Having real federal rights that will strengthen the union, that has been discussed over and over again. To me, one of the most illuminating proposals was that made by the Law Minister Shanti Bhushan then, was that fundamental rights should be put to public, any change or vitiation of fundamental rights in the legislature must be put to referenda. Now, we don't have a referendum idea, but we can. And we should, because that will at least offer some protection. And I would add to that what the communist members said, that also any erosion of federal rights also should be put to public referenda. For that matter, I would say, why not take the US model and have equal representation of states in the upper house, in the Rajya Sabha? That will give some protection.
Thank you, Bhupen. Thank you, Radha. Please give them a resounding round of applause. Intense